All right, we might be streaming now. So the purpose of this video is to check out various sidechain effects. We have a variety of genres ready to go with masking issues, sidechain issues that could be corrected with sidechain. We've got EDM, we've got kind of a cinematic, maybe almost action trailer-esque piece ready with some low end, and just some indie rock, kind of a bass and a drum groove, with Big Beautiful Door from Boz, Trackspacer from Wavesfactory, and Neutron 3 from iZotope, all ready to go to sort of balance the low end. Particularly, we've got kicks and booms and synths and bass guitars and synths in a different genre ready to go. So I set up some examples here, and we'll see how far we get in kind of cleaning up some of the low end, if this is a technique you're interested in. There's a lot about sidechaining and how to do it, but there's not necessarily just, approaches, and I want to kind of walk through, explore how you might get the kick and the synth and the bass to sort of, bounce, right? The first example is at 105 BPM. It's a drum kit that sounds like this. And a bass that is pretty resonant in the sub and the low end frequencies. So we'll put those together and we'll just check them out for a sec. If you notice this noise and that bothers you, I have a wonderful compressor on this kit. And the compressor is the Wolf compressor. It's just a simple Native Instruments kit, but if it sounds, good at all, it's because what I've done is I've added a Wolf compressor to try to crunch it up a bit. Let's see if, actually I just added it. Let's see. Wonder what that buzz was if that wasn't it. There's still some noise there. Maybe that's straight from the bass. So these little markings up here are indicating what is usually referred to as masking. Not sure how my voice is sitting in the mix here. So masking is masking, we've got a lot of words for the same stuff. We've got masking, we've got sidechain compression, and there's ducking. Ducking is the most exaggerated version of it, where you kind of picture background music and a radio voice, and the radio voice makes the background music get quieter, right? That would be the most obvious example of ducking. You're ducking the loud music so that the radio announcer can have its big radio voice, right? Sidechain compression and, whatever the other one that I said was, is going to be maybe more focused, but they're all the same technique, really. And that is suppress frequencies that other frequencies in your mix are pronouncing. So you begin to see there, Neutron is introducing all of these frequencies here, saying, Hey, these are spots. Oh, masking. That was the one I was forgetting. I don't use masking as a term myself, but it's clearly a thing. Masking is the effect that sidechaining is attempting to correct. So let's not start with Neutron. Actually, let me turn Neutron off and make sure Trackspacer is off and Big Beautiful Door is on. And the reason I'm starting with Big Beautiful Door from Boz Digital Labs is because it is the closest to a compressor if you just used compressors. If you just started compressors and you were just, not using fancy tools like these, but just using a regular old compressor, Boz takes those principles and I think presents them most clearly here in Big Beautiful Door, and then he adds a bunch of extra features. Now I've started with the low end of the kick drum, compressing down the bass guitar. But before I go on, let me just make sure that everyone understands all the genres that I'll be covering. So we've got that rock, pop, indie kind of sound. We've got this sound, which is more of a epic-y music, trailer-esque, action-y. And it's mostly drums. But, and we're going to work on this boom with those drums and this synth, which, if you look at the master here, has a lot of low-end resonance. This is the tonic, or the primary frequency that you hear is this 176 to 125 hertz. But there's still a lot of low-end resonance, and rather than just low shelving it, how would you deal with it relative to that boom, right? So that they don't clash. And then we've got this kind of EDM example. Sorry for the loudness there, but this is going to get loud. This is our bass line. We'll get some hi-hats going. These are some cymatics hi-hats. Here's the beat. Add some chords. We'll just turn the chords down for a second. They're just more to get you a feel for the genre that you might be going for here. And you can hear that the kick and the bass there, might have some conflict. It might be okay, but it might work better in the mix if that kick and that bass traded spaces every once in a while, right? So those are the genres that we're going to be working with. I realize what happened there. Apologies. This genre needs to be at the right tempo. Obviously, I played the wrong tempo because I was thinking about the sidechaining and not about the music. This is the tempo for the more epic kind of, or just sort of cinematic sound. And again, you've got this big boom with kind of a synth to negotiate and think about how would you, and you could just high pass it. You could just high shelf it, or, you know, low shelf, cut the low shelf. But would you be interested in sidechaining it in case there's a moment where you'd want the sub 100 hertz parts of this to be resonant, along with, you know, along with a boom. And that boom is pretty subby. If you've got headphones on, you might want to make sure that you're hearing it. It's pretty low end. All right, let's go back. So we were going to start with these kind of pop rock, indie rock drums. And we are going to start with Big Beautiful Door. So what I've done here is take Big Beautiful Door and use the preset called Make Way for Bass with an external bass, and set up the sidechain in the DAW to head over to Big Beautiful Door, so that Big Beautiful Door knows when the whole loop is happening. This is a whole loop. And what I had to do was tune the high pass and low pass sidechain EQ to select the kick drum. And the threshold is way up here, because if I bring it down a little bit, I pick up the snare drum. And I don't need the snare drum necessarily for this exercise, so I can move it just above where those snare drum transients are hitting. You can see it's a very short transient that I've selected. The EQ is very narrow. It's between 58 Hertz and 373 Hertz. Where it probably starts, let me go back to the preset here. Make way for bass, external bass. It starts way down here, and that's effectively ducking. That is the entire frequency spectrum of the drum loop is compressing the entire bass line. That's not what we want. So make way for bass. What I really needed, well, let's start with make way for kick. So bass ducker, extension kick 2, extension kick 1. Let's start with 1. So I see this blinking a lot. I see this cyan in front of the blue a lot. I hear in my headphones a lot of like fluttering of the bass tone. That is easily all corrected with the threshold. Looks like I got a snare drum there, but the rest of them were pretty much snare drum or kick drum transients. Just for fun, let's look at kick drum 2. So what I'm missing is the second kick drum, the lighter kick drum right there. But I don't want to pick up the snare. Now what I can do potentially to solve that is that EQ adjustment that I was talking about earlier. Pick up a couple ghost snare hits, and but I've dialed in something that is getting closer. Now, what are we hearing with what's happening with the bass? The hold is very short, 0. The ratio is infinite to 1, so very high. But the release is 31 milliseconds, not very long. Let's extend that a bit so that we hear the bass get compressed for a slightly longer period of time. 31 milliseconds is difficult to digest if you're not training your ear to the amount of time that takes. Just for kicks, let's go back to the tempo this should be at, which is about here. That's maybe even, we've kind of like settled into this tempo. Let's just chill it out a little bit. So that's, I feel, a little exaggerated. If you're paying attention to the way the bass and the kick are interacting, there's an almost exaggerated kick drum punching through that bass right here at 200 milliseconds, 211 milliseconds. It's even happening on the snare drum now again. For some reason, I thought I had it dialed in. Let's move that threshold up a touch. So if you hear, there's just a super quick 0.2 of a second duck or compress or, you know, quieterness of the bass guitar when that kick drum happens. You know, I would consider that a mix improvement, and I would probably keep working on it. But let's move on, because we've got a lot of ground to cover, to Trackspacer. Now, this is a product from Wavesfactory, Big Beautiful Doors from Boz Digital Labs. Let's move on to Trackspacer, because this is one of those touted magic tools that, you know, really does wonders for a lot of things. And let's see if it applies to this case. So I've already turned the high cut down. I've already made some adjustments, and we're going to listen to it for quick. Already, as soon as I turn it on, you notice the bass gets quieter or like kind of high-passed. It's almost like the default settings are to compress it way longer than we had at Big Beautiful Door. Those were tiny little ducks, like tiny little dips in the dynamic range when the kick drum was happening of the bass. But this is just carving out huge sections of time. And it's pictured there. The visual kind of gives you the indication that maybe that's what it's doing. But the release is only 30 milliseconds, which is actually shorter than what we dialed in Big Beautiful Door. So that, to me, has been confusing. Now, Wavesfactory tends to work better if I'm looking for a smoother, longer-term thing. But the fact that the release is 30 milliseconds and feels like it lasts half a second is very confusing to my ear, or almost a second. It says 30 milliseconds, but if I listen to it here, that's not 30 milliseconds of ducking at that frequency range. So let's, you know, the frequency is at 109 hertz, and the ratio is at 50%. The ratio at Big Beautiful Door was infinity. You know, it's just different tools are going to start encouraging you to figure out what it is that they mean with their numbers and how to play with them. Okay. If I just take the ratio down to 15. Or 7, you know, I start hearing a little bit more of the just a little bit of dip that I'm looking for. It still feels a little slow, but that was a little bit more what I was thinking. And then if I go to 100%, it's like, forget about it, right? I just hike past the whole track. Now, if I bring the the reason I picked the high cut at 108 was because that was right around where the snare stopped appearing on the visual display. I don't see the visual responding to the point where the snare hits. So if I bring it even lower, it's sort of like a low shelf being cutting the low shelf, which is actually kind of cool. So, you know, Wavesfactory's definitely got a different vibe going on. Let's check out Neutron. Let's turn Wavesfactory off and check out Neutron, and then we'll check out the other genres here. So with Neutron, maybe I should move this EQ over here, this master EQ. Well, let's it's just an equalizer, and you have to put Neutron or some Neutron type plugin. I think it was called Mix Tap in version 2, and then they got rid of that in version 3. It's just an EQ, and you use the masking part to select your other channel. I didn't name it anything, so it's just called Neutron. You can adjust your sensitivity, and it will show you I have to turn it on. All of these areas that it needs to be, you know, dipped. And so I also hit learn here. You can also learn some EQ spots with Neutron. So it's learning. Yep, and it picked a couple of frequencies, and it decided that they were learned because it turned back to white out of the orange. So it's picked these frequencies. This went way down here. Excuse me, need dinner. And so I could just, you know, pull these two down. Oh, that is a shelf. I don't want a shelf. Let's make it a bell. And this one. Whoa. That is a proportional EQ. Now, before we continue, I'm going to turn that off real quick and show you why I picked the sounds that I picked. When we just look at the kick in FabFilter's Pro Q3, what we're going to notice is the resonant tone of the kick drum is 70 hertz. When we switch over to the bass, it's not 70 hertz, but it's 94 hertz. So the idea is, do we want the kick to punch through at 70 hertz while the bass is up at 94 hertz? There's other things we can do here. There's a lot of other things we can do here. But this boom that we're going to look at later, 58 hertz. We've got these drums that are part of that segment. 58 hertz. We've got this bass synth that's part of that segment. .58 hertz. So I carefully chose the sound sources that we're looking at because they had masking opportunities that we are going to try to work on cleaning up. If you listen to the beat, it's got a lot of low end under 117, and you look at the bass. There's opportunities to clean those up. So they don't exactly collide yet, but that's the one that we'll look at last. So now that we're back with And we've got a limiter on there. Now that we're back with Neutron, and we kind of understand which frequencies are happening here. Let's bring that up here again. Not that one. This one. Yep. It's funny. I've got a bunch of different genres happening. Now, it's interesting that the scale is the way it is. Let me make sure that the scale, yeah, that's what I'm used to. Ah, here we go. I'm used to the scale looking a little more. Let me pull that all out and just start over. So we'll learn this baseline. There we are. So I just restarted everything because I just wanted to see what it was recommending from scratch. Now what we've got is a proportional EQ and a shelf, and both of these can be turned into dynamic EQs, that they only show up when the sidechain that's external comes in on that band. So number 2, extend dynamic, sidechain external band 2. Get them off the visual display. So you can see that they're actually responding to when the kick drum happens. But I'm not hearing as big a difference as I heard with Big Beautiful Door. One of the reasons that I started with Big Beautiful Door, it's the most direct and relatable to the kind of old-fashioned way of doing it with just a compressor. Picking your frequencies with Neutron, the most specific way of doing it, and Trackspacer is the least. It's the most abstracted. It tries to solve more issues for you than if you've already worked out how to do it, then you maybe needed help solving. So I've definitely worked with Neutron successfully and had it do what I wanted it to do, but I'm not getting that to happen here. Sorry, dry throat. What we're gonna do is actually move on. I'm guessing that it'll either come to me or make sense later. But let's just check out these booms, because let's move on to a different genre and check out how to do the same exercise with different sounds. So we are again going to start with Big Beautiful Door on the Omnisphere synth, which means that we are not going to have it on the others. Which means do that. Why did boom get there twice all of a sudden? How did boom get here twice? This is not a track. I clearly messed up. So this is the boom. And it's really a long tail of a boom. But these are typical for your kind of cinematic, trailer-esque booms. And you may not choose this type of bass synth, but I picked it because it's got kind of a low end that is worth carving out. So let's see if we can carve out the low end based on that boom. And what we want to do is pick the side chain for Big Beautiful Door to the bass synth, which is, I'm not seeing it here because boom, because I want an omnisphere. There it is. Somehow this popped in and I don't think it needs to be here. So over here I want to send to a side chain called Omnisphere Big Beautiful Door. And we want to, I'll start with a preset again called Kick. Bass deck or external. I think Kick 2 is the one that I tend to work with most. Oh, when I changed the EQ, it found it. There we go. So you pick the frequencies that your boom is going to be, and you pick the threshold for your boom. That's your side chain. Now again, 31 milliseconds, 31.7 milliseconds, not enough for me. So I'm gonna duck it for a good 175 at first. Oh, there we go. Watch the red. Now I feel like I hear the boom. And the bass pulse is slowly, I mean, it's not super bassy, but the synth pulse is slowly dissipating. And maybe that's too much, so. And then we'll add the drums. They're gonna sound loud, so get ready. And we can keep working with this and, you know, work out the low end of the drums with the boom and the synth as well. We're going to focus on the synth because that's working out this sort of boom with synth is the first step. So we're going to start there. Let's move on to Trackspacer. And again, try the same exercise with Trackspacer. We'll turn Big Beautiful Door off and try this side chain to Trackspacer. This high cut doesn't make as much sense anymore, right? Because the high cut you want you want it to be the boom. And the long extend that Trackspacer was doing before makes more sense this time, because it's one boom every measure. You can even turn it way up because it really cleans up the synth, right? And if you look at the synth, just to show you what's happening with the synth, it's a unfinished patch, and I did a bunch of little adjustments with the effects so that it fit this example. What I've got is an overdrive pedal on it, which I picked because it kept that low end, the subby end, that we wanted to cut with the boom. The boom we wanted it to go down when the boom would hit, right? Some of these others, if you look at the FabFilter EQ or other EQs that'll show you what frequencies are happening, the fuzz face, for instance, it doesn't have all that low end. Well, it does have some, but it's mostly emphasizing upper tones. So I picked a distortion that was specifically keeping that low end warmth in the synth, so that we could kind of bypass it, as it were. And the last one would be Neutron. So let's grab a Neutron and throw it over here, and make sure that we're sending to the Neutron on Omnisphere. Omnisphere, Neutron, Omnisphere, Neutron. Here it is. So we'll turn that off and this on. And let's just take a moment to let it learn the EQ. Okay, it's up, jump. Actually, we can have it delete these because these were from the previous. You can hear me, right? Yeah. There we are. So clearly the kind of the tonic, or the first, is it harmonic or overtone? Harmonic, the first harmonic, the root harmonic, and then the sort of the first overtone. And we would need Neutron to also be at the boom, so that we can listen for it. Assuming this is the... There we are. Basically, this is a high shelf. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, this is a lot of... But let's put a bell EQ and just make it nice and broad here. And dynamic. So that it's using an external sidechain for the band. So it's trying to come down here. The white line is it trying to come down when the boom is happening, but it's... There we go. I had to adjust the threshold a little bit. Graphics are a little choppy. It might be because I'm streaming and recording, processing. So every time the white line dips, the boom is hitting and the bass synth is ducking. I mean, I see it. I don't really I don't really hear it in my headphones. Probably because they're headphones, and we're talking about 60 hertz here. I'll make it a bunch wider and bring it a little lower. You also... There we go. Now I can hear it. The synth sounds a lot kind of wimpier, but it slots into its... What did you need that synth for anyway? You wanted it to be more of a pulse. So this is a pretty huge duck. I mean, that's kind of crazy. You might as well just take a low shelf and just cut the whole synth at this point. But if you wanted to pulse it, and if you wanted your full mix, you wanted to set something like this up for your full mix, when that boom goes away, maybe you want the sub to come in. Let's take the bass out. Now you want the sub. So you could set up a mix where this is only going to sidechain when the boom is happening. And then it'll high pass. So maybe it's a convenience if you want to set it up that way. And then once the boom is gone, you've got that low end in your synth. It's an idea. We're exploring, right? We're exploring here. So you can also work on that with the drums, but let's move on to the EDM. So the whole package here sounds like this. Oh, I should have probably slowed the previous one down to 90, but we had it raging along at 106. This one we're going to do at a 140. So, many apologies. I was trying to get this to neutral unity. Why isn't it showing up at unity here? Let me try this way. So that the chords would sound as loud as they should. Try this again here. Once again, I did the same thing. I'm still learning how to control everything in Studio One. It's been a year and I'm still learning things. So we'll look at FabFilter one more time. Just some gentle clipping. Just some gentle clipping. It's EDM. We can do some gentle clipping. So, the exercise here, and I've been using kick on top and bass next to it. We don't really need the hi-hat, and we don't really need the chords. So, the chords are there for context, and the hi-hat is there for context. The bass and the kick are what we're focusing on. Let's bring in Big Beautiful Door and send the sidechain to Nexus Bass Big Beautiful Door. There it is. And start with our favorite preset, external kick 2. So that right there was what I go through with tuning the kick, because sometimes if I've got and the reason I picked drum loops is precisely to show you this, how to pick a kick out of a loop, so that you pick the kick and not the kick and the snare, right? You need to make, if you don't want the snare to sidechain the bass, then you need to do what I just did, which was dial in the kick and not the kick and the snare. Kick, snares down there. And the way I did that was with the EQ. So I took the high pass filter all the way down to 20 hertz and the low pass filter only down to 742. And now we're going to listen to the bass, and we're going to change the release again, because the release is only 31.7 milliseconds. Let's make it really long and have that bass sound quiet. I mean, you can totally hear that. The bass is gone. The low end of the bass is gone until the very end, just before the next kick, almost, most of the time. So we want to bring it into the, we'll start at 175. Yeah, and that's still too long. 163 is still too long. So we'll bring it a little shorter. I mean, 50 is a reasonable assumption, 50 milliseconds, but listen to the way they're interacting. You know, you want to think about that kick drum is pretty short, but I picked one that wasn't super short. That kick drum has got a little bit of beef oomph, a little bit of duration. So you want to think about, how do you want that bass to respond to that kick? The low end of that bass synth to get out of the way for that kick. If you're doing kick, we could invert all of these examples and have bass push down the kick drums. Every single one of these, the bass could be pushing the kick drum away. But in each of these examples, I've got a low boom or a kick, a drum kit, or this kind of more electronic drum set pushing the bass out of the way. Now that clears the way. That is a very clear, decisive, 52 milliseconds right there is a very clear, decisive, push it out of the way for 0.5 of a second. But let's check out what happens if it's even shorter. That's just about right in my headphones. Things are going to sound different in speakers. You could have totally different choices. It's partly about the whole mix, but listen for the difference. I mean, once I get into this 50, 60, 70, 80 place, I feel like I'm cutting too much out, but let's just listen. I'll go up to 120. Now that is more pumping. This actually does have a bit of bounce at this tempo. So 123 milliseconds has a bit of, 124 almost, has a bit of give and take, because that kick drum only comes in every few beats. You feel that bass kind of like pulling in. It's got that kind of, you know, that kind of push-pull, kind of whooshy-gushy kind of feel. But it can make you seasick. That low end can make you seasick if you're not careful. So I would dial it down to like 60. And I might settle closer to 30 or 40. Those are your choices. So let me bring in the synths and the hi-hat so that we get a little bit of joy back in our lives. Where did the synth go? Somehow I managed to remove the synth from the world. There it is. So I'll leave you with that. You know, I could have gone into more detail with a bunch of these examples. We didn't even do the EDM with Trackspacer, which, as you know, would have been slower, and you can change that release time, but it tends to feel gooier. It tends to feel longer and more extended, which, you know, is a choice, I guess. But just be aware that Trackspacer seems a little slower to respond, and that 30 milliseconds doesn't quite feel the way that maybe it reads. And then Neutron, you could clearly do all this with Neutron, but that's a lot of pick your frequency, do the EQ, look for the masking. I could have picked slightly different examples, but with the Neutron, you really can be really specific about which frequencies you're actually masking. With Big Beautiful Door, I tend to be more specific with which frequencies I'm starting to select to do the compression. But with Neutron, I tend to be more specific about the frequencies that I'm compressing. So each of the three tools that I brought up, all of them I use, and all of them are great tools, have different applications, different strengths and weaknesses. None of them are good, none of them are bad, and the whole technique isn't good or bad. You can do all of these techniques or do none of them in your mixing. But I just hope that this helped kind of expose people who weren't familiar with this and haven't explored this much to the idea, and, you know, give them the more comfortability with the possibility of approaching it at some point. All right, enjoy. Happy mixing.